Hey, everybody. Welcome to Head, Heart, and Hustle, the podcast for creatives. I'm Alan Plummer, your host, and as always, thanks for listening. If you're new to the podcast, Head, Heart, and Hustle is designed to give you insights and encouragement from real working creatives. Anyone with a side hustle or creative outlet can feel isolated from their friends, their family, and other people around them who just don't get their passion. That's why this podcast exists, to help you feel motivated, learn, and just get a nice pick-me-up of creative energy from other people like yourself. Now, every episode, I interview a creative individual who doesn't just pretend to be creative. They've rolled up their sleeves and are producing great things because they need to. They know that being creative is part of who they are. Does that sound familiar? Good, then you're in the right place. Now, I have to be honest, I'm insanely excited for this episode. I'm going to be speaking with Brian Ward. Brian is another long-time friend of mine. Brian and I also know each other from our days working at the amusement park outside of Richmond, Virginia. If you guys listen to the episode where I interview Cece Pleasance, we talk a little bit about that. Brian comes from that world as well, and Brian was also kind of a main factor in motivating me to start this podcast. I love Brian. He's a very funny guy. He and I think a lot alike. I always enjoy seeing him when I'm out in Los Angeles, and we end up talking for hours. So getting a conversation to stay on topic was a little bit challenging with us, but it's always great. He's got an amazing opportunity out there. He works for a company called Shout Factory and produces DVDs of old TV shows and box sets from our childhood. I'm not going to get into any of the good stuff, but there's a lot of great fun things that he does. I mean, man, this guy even hosts panels at Comic-Con in San Diego. And it's just, he's got his own podcast with his girlfriend. He's done videos for his company on YouTube and was their spokesperson. Like, you talk about a guy that just kind of lives and breathes creativity in every outlet of his life. Yeah, that would be it. That would be him. And oh, of course, I didn't even mention the fact that he enters film festivals and makes short films with his friends. So insanely excited for this episode. So I'm going to stop blabbering and let you guys listen, but enjoy. Brian, how are you?
I am doing very well, sir. How are you?
I'm good. It's been I guess a couple months now since we saw each other, since I was out your way.
And yet it feels like eons ago.
It does. Well, you've been a very busy man. It sounds like you've had a lot going on.
Yeah.
So both professionally and personally, it sounds like quite a few little things. You've actually been, it's very funny. I've joked with a couple folks, you're a very hard man to pin down and get time with. So one, I really appreciate you making time for this. I know you're insanely busy.
I appreciate you being able to fit me in. With the moment you said you wanted to do this podcast, I knew it was going to be awesome. So, and I've had the pleasure of, I heard the one you did with Cece, loved it. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So as you know, we kind of have a nice little structure here, and really the fun of this is people's answers. So you kind of know the road we're going to go down. But one of the things I like to do at the start is just ask people to introduce themselves and tell a little bit about themselves. So let's go with that approach to begin.
Oh wow. Well, basically, I was born a poor child in North Carolina. No, my life has been pretty good. I can't complain. I currently hold the position of Senior Director of Video and Web Production at a company called Shout Factory.
Fancy pants, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a fancy way of saying I produce Blu-rays and DVDs for a living, which luckily, because of my current job being owned independently, it's not a studio, it means I do basically the job of what would be 10 different people at a studio. So I write the backup box copy, I hire the people who create menus, I tell them what I want to go on the discs, I go out and I find archival bonus material in vaults somewhere, and then if there's room on the disc, I create additional bonus material. So all the documentaries you've seen, all the audio commentaries and stuff like that. And at another studio, that would all be done by different people. But as a result of us being small and indie, started by the same guys who started Rhino Records back in the day, we are able to touch a lot more of every project, and I get to sort of give it a cohesive theme, if you will.
Right.
And that's been my job for the last 12 years, almost 13 now. And I literally started in the mailroom working 3 days a week. It wasn't even a room. It was a cubicle next to the bathroom. And I was just stuffing envelopes for radio stations. You know, you send off the CD, the promo CD or DVD off to radio stations. And because I had been working in VHS and DVD retail at a little company called Suncoast, that a lot of people may not necessarily remember, but those of you that do,
us older folks that do,
those of you that remember that it was like heaven on earth in any mall. And because I got to know all of the customers and intimately almost, I mean, I knew exactly what they were coming in for the moment that they walked in the door. Then I became very opinionated. And I would say, hey, why are your menus like this? Hey, why is that? Why are the buttons not intuitive? Why are you doing this way? And they were like, if you think you can do better. And I've never looked back. So, but
challenge accepted.
That's awesome. Will say, though, I would be hard pressed to say that it's a better job than dressing up in fur and working for one Alan Plummer.
And I can't imagine. Yeah, I knew you were going to go there. We were going to get there eventually. So let's dive right in. Yeah. So we actually met years ago. So you've heard CeCe's interview. It's funny how many people I've interviewed from Richmond and who've passed through there, and my list continues to grow.
Yeah.
With folks who have worked for GWAR and other things. So it's kind of mind blowing to think about that. But yeah, back to your point. So we both started out at kind of the aforementioned amusement park, right? Kings Dominion, which is right outside of Richmond in my hometown. And I met you, I guess you were in high school then. Were you like 16 when you started working there? Yeah.
I was a junior in high school. It was the summer before my junior year. So 94,
holy cow,
I think.
Right.
93,
so
94.
So for the folks, for our listeners who haven't heard or don't know, so I when I was in college, I supported myself through college by starting out as a character actor at Kings Dominion and dressing up, being one of those people that dressed up as a cartoon character. And this particular amusement park at the time had the licensing rights for all the old Hanna-Barbera characters, right? So the Jetsons, the Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, Yogi Bear, that whole world, right? And so I dressed up myself for a couple years and then moved into my first, I guess, management role and ran the program for a while. And that's where I met you.
Yeah.
And you ended up becoming kind of one of our more popular Yogi Bears, to say the least.
Oh, I appreciate that. Well, it got to a point where when you've got, and I'm not saying this because you're the one interviewing, but when you've got people who have done it and people who have gotten away with things and people who have learned to be fun in the costumes rather than some robotic character, and we've seen them. We know the people who can't see. The moment you look at someone in costume, you know whether or not they can actually see through that head, and it's a very difficult task to get instantly. But once you start to attune your eyes to going through that mask, suddenly you can see the world, and the moment that happens, you can do anything you want.
Yes. And it's surreal, right? You and I have had all these conversations. It's kind of funny. My big joke was, and this influenced my writing for a while, and my first novel was this idea of fame, because it felt really off-putting, right? So again, back to your point, this is kind of pre-internet. This was before kind of, celebrity journalism and a lot of stuff beyond like maybe People magazine back in the 90s.
Sure.
And it was really surreal because we'd put on these costumes, right? And you'd go outside and get mobbed by kids and families and have all these pictures taken. And literally, right, we'd be out there for 30 minutes and you'd move maybe 10 feet.
Yeah.
And you'd feel like a star. Well, and we'd come back in and take those costumes off, and then nobody looks at you when you go back outside.
The real surreal moments are actually when legitimate celebrities would come to the park and would beg to take pictures with you.
Yes, yes, yes,
You know,
yes.
Christian Slater asked to take a picture with me. Sinbad asked to take a picture with me. You know, it's like, and that was the year that G.I. Jane was being done over in Richmond. So, so Bruce Willis brought the kids over, you know, in the big souped up SUV, which at the time we would laugh at, now we would laugh at, but at the time it was like it was like we were looking at a rocket ship in the middle of the parking lot. And it was an SUV with like a TV in it. And that to us was everything. It's like, oh, he's a celebrity. And he's like, can we take a picture with you? And I was like, are you kidding me?
Did I ever tell you about the time I was at the White House? Did you know about that? No. So I went to the White House for the Easter egg hunt.
As Huckleberry Hound?
No. So I was actually there as George.
Oh, okay.
And so there was a bunch of it. This was probably a little bit before you when I was still dressing up.
Yeah.
So I was there as George Jetson, and we had kind of some of the other folks out of my age group who were a couple years older than you. And so we go up for the Easter egg hunt at the White House this one year. This is when Clinton was in office, when Bill Clinton was president. And we were there and we're up on stage. And what was odd was that they're super tight on security. They have to have your social security number and they check you and everything when you come in, show them your driver's license. But when we were getting dressed, we had a member or two of the Secret Service in the tent with us because they had to see us get dressed to make sure that the people who had passed security clearances were in fact the people in the costumes, right? So that makes total sense, right?
Sure.
Not surprised. So we get dressed, we go out on stage. I can't remember who the host was that year. I have to go back and look. I feel like this was like 94-ish, maybe 93. Mm-hmm. And I remember Chelsea being young. And at one point they were up on stage and Chelsea Clinton saw us and ran up and gave a big hug to Scooby-Doo beside me. And Scooby-Doo was one of my old buddies. And I saw for like a split second, like the Secret Service just kind of tense up a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Because here's like right. So here's the president's daughter running up to this person in a costume, and it was all very innocent. But we're on this stage on the lawn of the White House, and out of the corner of my eye, I'm like, and it's not even like getting tense. It's just that momentary snapping to attention. I was like, wow, that's kind of weird.
Well, you never know when Scooby-Doo is just gonna like snap your neck, with one hug. It's just an instant,
exactly. We don't even know our own strength.
Yeah, there are ninjas in those costumes just ready to assassinate the kids of presidents. It's crazy. Well,
and I will tell you, again, from a creative perspective and from a professional perspective, I liked your comment about kind of getting away with stuff. And I hadn't really thought about that. A lot of the success that I've had professionally and personally is this kind of idea that you don't wait for permission. You just kind of do things and go, right? Because no one's going to give you permission.
Yeah.
And I think your experience has been the same way. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, how much of that do you think was informed by us running around in these costumes as teenagers, seeing what we could get away with, and then the shock of being able to kind of do what we want, right?
Well, and here's the thing is I am now, my significant other's a clinical psychologist, so I know a lot more about this than I even did then, but it makes total sense. All the studies that have been done about what it means to wear masks and what you feel like you're allowed to get away with if you have a mask. And it even dates back to studies that were done, in World War II, where it's like, if I'm in a uniform or if I'm wearing a helmet or if I'm, I can do these atrocious things because I feel like I am somehow protected. And that goes for good things as well, or things that might be perceived as potentially bad, as a character. Especially like if you're at Disney, I don't think Mickey Mouse can get away with running up and down Main Street at a full clip. They've got stations where they have to stand and take their pictures for however long. But you and I, if we could get away with it, we would be running and jumping off of walls and off of benches, and we would be like hitting on girls, and we would be doing things that you can't get away with. And you know me, I was super shy at the time. But because I was in a costume as a cartoon character, because I was Yogi Bear, I could adjust that tie and I could be suave. I could adjust the fur back a little bit. I could fix my hat above my head, and I could do anything I wanted. And I could, I had people of different ethnicities swear I was a different ethnicity than a very pale white kid with red hair in that costume. And
She had swagger.
Yeah, and because you're allowed to. It's like they don't know who I am.
Right.
And then, like you said, the moment you take that costume off, because we didn't have uniforms like the rest of the park employees, we would just walk right out onto the street wearing shorts and a t-shirt and, you know, a ball cap or something. No one had any idea that was Yogi Bear walking down the street.
Right. Yeah. It was a fun job.
It was a great
fun job. It was definitely a detachment from reality for a long time. So
yeah.
And it's also funny because it's how I met so many of my friends who ended up becoming artists and creative folks and kind of making careers out of it, like yourself. So yeah, I was really glad for that period of my life and that job. It was just the neatest experience to have. It was definitely kind of a delayed adulthood. You know what I mean? For a while there. But it was a lot of fun.
I delayed my adulthood for a little too long. By the time I left, because I had done 5 summers there. I did 4 in a row, and then I graduated college and came home and didn't have anything to come back to. And I was like, well, King's Dominion's always there. So I called them up, and so there was 4 years in a row, then another year where I wasn't there, and then another year where I was, and it was different. And, you know, I'm like, I am old and I shouldn't be here. And not because the zeal was gone, but because the people were different and the atmosphere was different. And
well, by that time, you feel like everybody's kind of creepy big brother, I think.
You know what I mean? You don't want to.
Because so many of them are younger, too.
Yeah, you don't want to feel that way, but you do. And at what point did you decide you were done? Was it just because like college and...
Yeah, it was just college. Part of that was kind of that hard realization that I can't make a career out of this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the funny part is there was a number of us who did, right? And so the job was a 10-month job. It certainly paid for my education, which was great, right? I had my apartment in Richmond. I was able to buy a new car in my Jeep and had a pretty good lifestyle, and it was great. It worked out really well when I was in college. And then when I graduated, you know, I had this English degree and I was like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I was still writing and doing the plays and the books and stuff. And some of the folks that I knew talked about going down to Disney and working for several years at Disney. One of the guys who used to be part of that program ended up going down there and becoming, I think, a Ghostbuster or something like that. So we knew folks that stayed in that vein. And I was like, you know, I'm not sure if I want to work in an amusement park for the rest of my life. And so I kind of got to that point to where I was like, okay, I think it's run its course. And it's not as much fun anymore. And I really want to focus on my writing. And that coincided with a number of people heading up to New York or out to Los Angeles. And so it just felt like the time, you know?
Well, that leads me to my question. And now, if you haven't noticed, we've turned this around. I'm now interviewing you.
Yeah, no, it's totally fine.
So my question then is, what did that do to your creativity the moment that you weren't, because we were in the entertainment department, literally, you would go up into a lounge area and you could do whatever you wanted. You could play video games, you could sleep, you could watch TV, you could draw in the background, you could write, you could use your time to write. Well, you couldn't as much because you were a supervisor, but when you're suddenly not surrounded by, and we should say that the year you were there, the 2 years you were there that I was there, we were also surrounded by, we had like 30 different people in costume, but then we also had the Paramount people, the Klingons, Star Trek, Federation, Bajoran, you know, all those people. And then we also had a roving marching band that was huge. And then we also had jugglers and street magicians. Like it was literally like we were in a Hollywood lot. Where,
it was way too stereotypical almost. Yes.
Yeah. And it was all in one room, basically, where we were all hanging out. And what did that do to your creativity the moment that you leave that and suddenly you're surrounded by business people who are trying to make a living doing something else?
A couple things. One, it's really funny. One is that leaving that made me, gave me more drive. You know, the funny thing about being around creative people for me is it's a double-edged sword, right? So one, it's really energizing, right? Just like these conversations, it's always energizing for me. But to your point, when you work with those people day in, day out, day in, day out, you're constantly getting that feed of creative energy.
Yeah.
And I was never necessarily putting it into creating anything at the time.
Yeah.
So I was riding that wave of energy and that kind of input and that excitement, but I wasn't doing the hard work to create stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
So it forced me to kind of, get on the dime a little bit, get off my ass and sit down and write, because I had so much of that motivation for so long. And I walked out of that saying, damn, I as much as I got out of that, as much as I enjoyed it, I didn't necessarily work at nights and everything like I probably should have, because I was enjoying myself too much.
Right.
So that combined with like getting the corporate gig and doing some of the other stuff really forced me to do that.
That's interesting.
The other thing too, really quickly is, right, so you think about the time, right, before YouTube, before the internet, before self-publishing, unless you had a band and you were trying to tour with a band and make your own albums, most of us at the time didn't have opportunities for any kind of distribution stuff, right? You still had to go through mass media. If you were making a film, you need to try to get it into festivals because the internet didn't exist and you didn't really have a way to distribute that stuff.
Right.
Nobody was really self-publishing books, so I was thinking about trying to get an agent. And that also kind of clarified for me once I started writing that I needed to get the hell out of Richmond.
Yeah.
And you heard, Cece and I talked about that a little bit. It was a product of the time. I think today I wouldn't have necessarily left Richmond if I were in that same mindset. I could do what I'm doing now from there.
Sure.
But at the time, it was
Richmond.
like, wow, I need to be surrounded by creatives, but I need distance enough to keep me accountable and give myself deadlines and get stuff done.
Right.
And I will say that like the 2 or 3 years between when I left the park and headed up to New York were probably the most productive writing years of my life.
Sure.
I had a very dull job. I came home and I wrote every night, and I put in hours every night, and I cranked out a couple books and a couple plays. And by the time I moved up to New York, I had plenty of stuff to shop around to agents right out of the gate.
Right.
So
I'm opposite. I'm the opposite way. The moment I left the creative environment, and not just at the theme park, but in college, I was a theater minor. So I was constantly surrounded by the people that basically we worked with at the park. And I was just churning out short films and scripts. I was writing plays. I was writing short screenplays. I was writing feature-length screenplays that were awful, but I knew actors in the theater department that were dying to be on camera for things. So we would just spend our time, our weekends, and after class and everything, when we weren't rehearsing for theater shows, we were making movies and things like that. And that to me fueled that creativity and that drive. You're absolutely right. At the theme park, you burn out of it while you are there. So when you get home, you're not necessarily being creative. But when I left college and I left the park, suddenly I was working retail because no one told me that communications was a saturated field.
Right.
And suddenly I'm working retail and I'm working these other, and I sort of died inside. I wanted to work. I wanted to write. I wanted to, but I never grew up with a lot of friends. I grew up in a military family.
Right.
So I was one of those kids. I learned that there are two types of military brats. They're the kinds who make friends everywhere you go, and then the kinds that don't really make more than one or two anywhere they go, because what's the point? You're just moving in 3 or 4 years, and that was our case. And so I would only have like one friend anywhere I went, and so I didn't have enough friends to go out and make a movie. I didn't have, I did have one friend of mine there in Fredericksburg, where I lived, a wonderful gentleman by the name of Luke, who would get together with me and we'd try to make short films and everything. But it's very difficult to do that with one person. And suddenly the whole creative unit that was around me was gone. And for someone who wants to write, I suppose that's easier because you really just rely on yourself and a typewriter or a computer or a notepad or whatever. But for me, the writing was just a means to getting to shoot something, and I had nothing to shoot and no one to shoot with, and I didn't have a cast.
People engaged. Yeah. And I think it's funny that because your art, right, is much more collaborative and it requires people. And that makes total sense.
Not
Total
anymore,
sense.
though. Like you said, like today is the day of YouTube. And you've got YouTubers
Right.
who are just by themselves in front of a camera with 1 million views on every video, and it's making them a ton of money every year. And you're like, wow, we could have been doing that, but we would have had no outlet. Like no one would have ever seen it, because how would you get it in front of people? And would people have even gotten it? Like if you tried to put a YouTube video in front of people in 1992 or 93 or 94, right, people wouldn't have understood the video journal mentality. They would have been like, why would I watch this every week?
Right.
And it's changed.
Right.
In other words, I should have been doing this now instead of then.
Either
Thanks,
way.
Alan.
Well, you could still do it now, right? I mean,
no, I'm way too old. I'm too old. They will not get me. Like the kids. Ugh, the kids. They don't get it.
Well, yeah. You don't want to shoot yourself playing Minecraft for 10 hours.
I'm not twitching. I do have a friend of mine who is trying to make a career in Twitch, and it's a difficult thing. And the other thing is, like, I didn't grow up playing video games, so I think if I had a Twitch account, it would be me. I think it would be very entertaining because it would be me, A, playing badly, and B, getting very angry. And so people would be like, oh, I got to watch the redheaded kid play this video game.
That sounds really entertaining though.
Yeah.
Like with the right kind of humor, that's probably a hell of a lot more entertaining to me than some of the other stuff.
You and I need to talk offline, because I did tell this guy my Twitch idea for like what I think would make a successful Twitch channel.
Right.
And I think it's amazing. And he thought
as blue as possible, right?
We need to talk, Alan, because you and I, we would be able to make this thing work, I think. When we do, people listening to this podcast will be like, in 2 years, when we've got the most popular Twitch channel, they're going to be like, oh, I remember the day they talked about this.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly it. So, but in all seriousness though, you do have some side projects that you do now, mm-hmm. right? So, I mean, Twitch aside, the joking about Twitch aside, you still have embraced kind of this new opportunity in these new mediums now that, now that mass media in many ways, I'll go ahead and say it, now that mass media is dead, right? And you can have an audience without millions of people or hundreds of millions of people. You've absolutely taken advantage of that in a couple different ways, right? So what are some of the things that you've done to kind of explore that creative side outside of your job in the past several years?
Well, and that's the thing is my job it requires me to be creative to some degree. I'm making documentaries on a regular basis for some of these movies that we grew up on but never quite outgrew. And that's great. And it fulfills one aspect of my sort of creative drive. But I do find myself wondering if there's something else I could be doing that's more narrative. But then you run into the problem of, well, how do I finance that? Like even short films today can require a great deal of financing. And yes, I've got the outlet, but if I want to put it on YouTube or Vimeo or something like that, but I don't necessarily have the budget to go and pay a Hollywood crew, because for better or for worse, I live in Hollywood and none of these people want to work for free. But I did find several years ago, an opportunity called the Los Angeles 48-Hour Film Project. And the 48-Hour Film Project is an international project now. It was actually started by someone in your neck of the woods, someone in the Baltimore area. And they basically got together with friends of theirs and did this experiment over the course of a weekend where on Friday night, teams would draw out of a hat one of 12 genres. And then they would each, or the entire group would be given a character, a line of dialogue, and a prop. Not the physical prop, but like you have to use a dog bone. And how you use those things are entirely up to your group, but it has to be done in your genre. And that became very popular amongst them. So they decided, well, let's do it in other cities. And the next thing you know, it's an international event where every weekend someone in some city is making 48-hour films. And so my best friend Frank and I have been doing this. I think we're about to do our 14th one or something in a couple of weeks.
Oh, wow.
And that has fueled my creativity more than I could possibly say, because one of the key rules is that you're not allowed to be paid or pay crew members for their jobs. So it evens the playing field. Suddenly you do have people who want to be involved and they can't be paid. And they want the excitement of Friday night, getting a character and a line of dialogue and a prop and a genre. And by the end of Sunday night, you have to have a complete movie conceived, written, shot, and edited in that 48-hour period of time.
Holy crap. Yeah.
And for me, I think that is amazing because it's given me an opportunity to do things I wouldn't have normally done. If I'm paying a crew, I'm not necessarily going to take as many chances because I don't know if it's going to be successful. I don't know if I'm going to have blown that money that I just spent. But the moment that I'm freed up by financial obligations to the crew members, I'm suddenly willing to do more things. So I've done in the past 3 years or so, we did a short film that was, I'd never shot a narrative on green screen before. So we did basically a movie that took place in a car between 3 people. I had a green screen behind them. And then we went and shot a plate in a moving car going through a neighborhood. And we basically shot this short film where it was 3 people in a car having a conversation that then turned into a one shot that left the car and followed them and had a little twist at the end. And everybody was just sort of like, oh, I like the idea of trying to do this as a one shot thing. And I've got a theater background. So everyone I like to cast like to act. I let them act, long takes. And so we were like, oh, well, that was interesting. That was very successful. So what are we going to do next time? And the next time we ended up doing a short that was entirely split screen. And it was a holiday themed 48 hours. So, and we got drama. So we were like, well, our goal is to make them wish drama was never a genre. We're going to make it so dramatic that they're going to be like, oh my God, this is awful. So it was a New Year's Eve party, same party 1 year apart. So it was just before midnight in 2014 and just before midnight on 2015. And we got to see how the dynamics of the characters changed, all via the split screen, where if they were on the left side of the screen, they were in the past. If they were on the right side of the screen, they were in the present. And
Right.
And we would play with that. And it's like, that was difficult because we basically shot the entire thing and I directed it like it was a play, where it's like, look, here's a line down the center of the room. If you're on this side, you're happy. And if you're on this side, you're sad. And we're going to edit this in such a way that you're going to see these transitions between the characters happen based on where you are on this side or the other. And so that was a lot of fun. And we ended up getting a lot of notoriety for that one, simply because we were willing to take those chances where they're like, you're going to do a movie in split screen the whole time. And you're going to what? And so we sort of began to get noticed as the team that was willing to take chances. And then finally, the last one we did, I decided I want to create a movie where the drama of the movie takes place within a card trick, where, sort of a storytelling card trick. And I never, because I'm a huge magic nerd, magic as in magicians, not the gathering.
Right.
Because I'm a huge nerd of magic and magicians, and some of my best friends are magicians, I was like, it's crucial that we never cut away from the card trick. I never want anyone to say that could have been done in editing. So that was also sort of done in split screen, where it's like on one side of the screen or one, either top or bottom, we were looking at the card trick, and then we were watching reactions and the performances of the actors in the other hemisphere of the movie, and we would shift them, but you would never look away from that card trick. And again, it's one of those chances that I don't know that I would have taken if I had suddenly had to pay somebody. And so, yeah, I'm lucky that I'm in a town where that's available to me. But because the 48-hour film project is available in lots of different cities around the country, there are a lot of people that are listening to this right now that could easily get involved in this. And so I highly recommend that people do it and take the chance, because whether it's good or bad, you're going to A, love the experience, and B, you're going to love getting to be in a movie theater with other people in teams that made movies, and you get to watch all of them and see how they used their character or their prop or their line of dialogue differently than the way you did. So.
You and I have talked about this in the past. I think what I love about that, not just the experimentation that you guys are doing, but when you've done this for so long, right? It's evolved from, like, for me, not doing anything in film, coming in and saying, wow, I've got to create a short film in 48 hours is really daunting. You guys have moved beyond that to say, okay, we've done this enough to kind of know the routine.
Mm-hmm.
Let's push ourselves, right? To your point, let's experiment and let's try.
Yeah.
So for you, it's almost like this opportunity, constantly learning and constantly growing, instead of kind of falling back on, what's our story going to be this time? Are we going to do something comedic or whatever? Which I love, right? Because one of my big motivators is being challenged and growing and learning. And you're taking this whole concept and pushing the boundaries of it a little bit in a way that they may not have intended at the beginning, which is great.
Yeah.
Because it's forcing you to evolve as a filmmaker and forcing the crew and the folks working with you to evolve in their own skill sets.
Yeah, and there are some teams out there where you can clearly see that those people pre-planned all of this.
Yep.
Like you can see the stories, you can tell, and you're like, okay, we know that you just plugged in those required elements. And it takes away from the enjoyment of the creative process. Because if I want to make a short film, I'll just go make a short film. But the whole point of this is to be creative in a way that requires you to be a quick thinker. And so I appreciate the competition for that. But it also creates that environment that I found lacking. I need people to fuel me and to push me to do something. If I'm left to my own devices, I won't necessarily just sit down and write for 2 hours. I need someone, I need a deadline. I need someone to be like, we need a script by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And then I'll sit there and do it.
Deadlines are good. It's funny. I think a lot of creative people feel the same way. I think either there's a procrastination factor, right? Because what we have in our heads is this idea of a finished project is never as good of a first draft.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know that that's part of the process, right? We all know that comes with it, and that's the grind of the work. But it can be frustrating as you're going through it. Or then the other thing is, it's just kind of the idea of committing time to it when you've got other things to kind of do.
Yeah.
So I'm the same way. A lot of people I know need that deadline and that accountability. I also think when you've got tight deadlines like that, it takes out some of the opportunities for doubt, because you're moving so fast, you can't overanalyze and you can't question yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's a key part too. So now you also, it's kind of funny. You've done, your role at Shout Factory involves quite a few kind of creative elements as well. And not just the creation of the videos, right? Not just creation of the box sets, which for a lot of us who are nostalgic kids of the 80s, the 80s especially, kind of remember that stuff, even the 70s and the 80s. I will tell you, I told some people I was interviewing you, and a lot of my friends here in Philly were excited because they know Shout Factory. They know they have some of the sets and they know stuff that you've worked on.
Oh, wow.
And so they're kind of, you have this kind of, everybody was like, oh, I can't wait to hear that and hear what he does and kind of his process. But anyway, so what's interesting is I remember when you started to work there, and as you kind of moved up through the ranks, you started getting tapped to do videos for them, weren't you, for a while doing like weekly videos on YouTube for them? And
Yeah.
you've gotten to the point to where you're actually like hosting panels at Comic-Con. I mean,
Mhm.
like your role for the company has evolved a little bit, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah, for better or for worse for them, I have sort of become an unofficial face of the company,
Yep.
and I love that role because it's like we've been talking about. I love the chance to perform. I love the chance to get up and do things. We were doing those weekly videos for a while on YouTube, called Your Weekly Shout Out, and it started out basically as a commercial where it's every week we would tell you essentially what's coming out this week, but
Yep.
we will try to do it in a creative way. And one of the great joys of that was at one point we decided we needed a co-host. And so we ended up getting a young lady by the name of Jennifer Landa, who is a magnificent person and just a joy to be around. And we would shoot at the YouTube space. We were like, well, how can we make this really creative so that it's not just a couple of hosted segments? And so we would do skits, just full blown sketches, where we would take a still from the movie and use it as a background. And then
Yep.
we would perform in these and then cut to a clip or a bonus feature clip or something like that, or the trailer to the movie. And that was so much fun because you were like, well, we've got 5 different projects coming out next week. We need 5 different sketches, or we need 3 sketches and 2, sort of cookie cutter type. They're, also out. And we were constantly working on that with another gentleman by the name of Evan Brown, who is great at coming up with quick things like that and writing those. And that was some of the most fun that I've ever had. And sadly, we stopped doing it. It kind of fell apart when our jobs all required so much more and we weren't
Yeah.
funding these necessarily. It was we just needed to do them, and so
Right.
we weren't necessarily getting bigger budgets, and we weren't getting allotted time
Mm-hmm.
for doing it. It was just sort of like we need to make it when we can make it, and then Shout just sort of blew up, and we had to do stuff that were bigger than this,
Right.
and
Right. And so yeah, it's those are it's an extra deliverable every week. And
yeah.
you've got to write it and develop it and
Yeah,
do
and
the work and
you're
editing.
trying
I
to
get it.
bank it. You're trying to bank it. You're trying to shoot 5 of them at a time, and have them banked for the next month. But it just got away from us. But in its place, we ended up having to do more things, and we've done other things on YouTube. Shout Factory's got basically a prolific YouTube channel where we're creating all kinds of content, and it's a lot of fun. And then the opportunity to get paid to go to a comic convention, especially San Diego Comic-Con every year.
So jealous. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
I
Yeah.
mean, on the one hand, I get to go to Comic-Con every year, and I have for the last 11 or 12 years on the company dime. I was going before that when I was paying for it myself, but
Right.
on the flip side of that, I have to be at the booth. I can't
Right.
just
You're
go
working.
and wander and do stuff. But I got to revisit Yogi Bear a little bit this year because I got to dress up as Cthulhu in costume and spend, a half hour a day for 3 days.
You have to send me that picture. So when we have the episode up on the site, I want that picture to be available because that's so
For
awesome.
sure, for sure.
That's so
Yeah, and I think
awesome.
you saw the picture at one point and you're like, yeah, that's the classic Yogi
Pose. You even
Yeah,
had the pose down. It comes like that muscle memory. It just comes
Yeah.
right back.
Yeah.
I chuckled.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just thought that was kind of awesome because it's sort of like when you have that impulse to create, I think it just permeates everything, and you and I have talked about that. So in my role, right, I'm in marketing. I'm not creating every day, but I'm leading a team of creatives, and I'm, in some ways my job kind of touches on creativity, but I'm more of kind of the editor in chief and director of projects than I am kind of really rolling up my sleeves a little bit. But it's challenging, right? So it's challenging to do stuff at work and then try to make time for these 48-hour film festivals or the other podcasts, which we can talk about in a second really briefly, that you and your significant other do, or the costumes that you guys do for Comic-Con and all these other projects. It takes a lot to kind of juggle. What advice do you have, or how do you juggle all the stuff that you guys have going on in your lives day to day and try to keep all that running?
Juggling is actually a very appropriate analogy. And people say it all the time, like juggling lots of balls in the air and,
Right.
all of that. Trying to find the time to do all of it is impossible. So the question is, what do I do with the time I do have, and how do I prioritize this and that? And you're never happy. You're never feeling like you had all the time and every day to do everything you ever wanted to do. It really just
But would you say that you're happy in the moment? Like, I
Oh
agree
yeah.
with that. But like these moments, like even right now talking to you,
Mm-hmm.
like I've gotten to a point in my life where the sheer act of creating is enjoyment for me.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, right now, before I jumped on the podcast with you, and then immediately afterward, I'm working on my costume for Halloween, and it's not something that I'm normally doing. I'm not normally building costumes,
Right.
but it's a new thing, and it's something that I've not done before, and it's something that I enjoy. I enjoy puzzles. I enjoy figuring out. Like, I've never done this. I've never taken a class on this, but I wonder if this would work. And it might not be how a professional tailor would do it, but I'm creating ways to get the things I want. And I'm like you. In that moment, I'm the happiest. And,
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, I think it's that revisionist in me. At the end of the day, you're like, oh, I would have done if I'd done something different, but then that gives you the opportunity tomorrow to try that out.
Yeah, because it's a progress, right? And you never kind of hit that end point. And even when a costume's successful, right, you're walking away from that with lessons and ideas for the next one.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
And I love you using that as an analogy, because one of the things, and I had somebody interviewed a couple weeks ago that touched on this. It's really easy to think about creativity as kind of the traditional arts, right? Acting, music, painting, drawing, filmmaking, writing, any of that stuff. But I mean, in truth, right? Creativity at the root of it is simply creating something, and it really doesn't matter what it is.
Oh yeah, you can cook and be creative. I mean, it could be
Right.
like, oh, I'm out of cumin. What else would taste good with this? And you're going off book and you're not following the recipe, and it can be disastrous, or it could be the best thing you've ever done. And there's a certain enjoyment that comes out of that, and there's a certain satisfaction that comes out of the the end product. I think your job, actually, I think marketing and heading a team can be extremely creative, and maybe I'm just romanticizing it, but I think the idea of what can we do that's different, and what can we do that's not just a cookie cutter way of marketing something. I think we're now in an era where, the guy who often shoots a lot of my bonus features for me when we're doing documentaries, he also shoots electronic press kits, behind the scenes footage and things like that for some of the big studio movies. And he's about to, movies that he's worked on, The Conjuring 2 and Annabelle and stuff like that. He's talking about the fact that while they're in production, there's a marketing team there shooting VR and 360 and stuff like that. Well, someone had to be like, look, there's this technology out there. How do we use this to our advantage? How do we create this stuff? And it requires someone in the marketing department to be willing to take that risk, and then to send a crew out to succeed or not, and you learn from those mistakes.
And sometimes it's not even a crew, right? It's very funny, like your whole thing about experimentation and the example of the YouTube videos from Shout, right? So I was just at a conference and I met the guy who heads up marketing for the Philadelphia Flyers, right? The hockey team here in Philly. And he was talking about how they started to experiment with 360 video.
Yeah.
And literally, like, he doesn't even have a crew, right? So they got the budget, they go out and buy a camera, and he's going to practices and setting himself up in the middle of practice, and they're skating around him, right? And they're skating around him, taking shots, and he's just out on the ice, and he's literally a 1 or 2 person man show shooting that stuff. And they're like, well, screw it, we'll try it and see what happens, and we're going to shoot it and put it up on Facebook. And it's amazing because even, right, and I can tell you this, even at big brands, right, these massive budgets, there's still that idea of experimentation. And the best marketers I know absolutely have that creative element, because it's not just about the status quo, it's also about that kind of evolution and culture change and kind of experimenting and trying new stuff to go in new spaces.
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. I may, yeah.
You know, fear is the one thing that holds you back from being able to actually do something that's different. But fear can also drive you to get that different thing right. And
Totally. Yep.
you know, there isn't a day that you don't go out there and if you're doing something different and you're like, I'm not in any way informed on how to do this, that you're not second guessing or, you know, whatever. And all that's driven from fear to some degree. And for some people that's very exciting. And for other people it's not. And for the people who it's not exciting, they're not risk takers at all. And they don't necessarily go and create the Philadelphia Flyers 360 experience.
Right.
But the people who are like, look, I don't know if this is going to work, but let's go show a practice in 360, you know?
Yeah. Right.
That's amazing.
And the best people that I work with are the people that have that nugget, have that little spark to want to try new stuff.
Yeah.
That's a big thing that I look for in people. It's kind of, if you can really be creative, if you can really want to evolve a little bit, try new stuff, then you're definitely somebody I want to work with.
Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, what do you think is the best lesson that you've learned out of all your creative endeavors? What's the one big takeaway you think if you had to pick one out of all your projects?
Oh, man.
I know. I got to give you a couple hard ones.
You know, I think the one key lesson is there's always going to be adversity. You know, you're never going to have something that goes just as smooth as it could possibly go. And the question becomes, what have you learned in the past that makes it a little less hard to jump over that hurdle? And that's probably the thing that I enjoy doing the most, is attributing things that I have done or have not done but learned from to make every project going forward, you know, as smooth as possible. But let's be honest. I mean, you and I both know, as creative people, if there's no drama, it can get really boring. You know, that's what creativity is. That's what, you know, that's why
conflict, all good creativity comes out of conflict.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You don't want to watch a TV show where everybody's happy all the time.
I love it. You're the second person to exactly say that exact idea. You're absolutely right.
You know, Drea and I had this, we did this panel at Comic-Con, or I guess this particular panel, it was at WonderCon last year, and it was the psychology of the Marvel TV universe. And we had, Drea is a clinical psychologist, and she uses superheroes frequently to sort of disseminate knowledge about real psychology to the masses, you know, to try to remove the stigma of mental health. And we had on that panel writers from all of the Marvel TV shows. And at one point I asked the question, well, do you ever feel the need to fix one of your characters, or to make sure that your character comes out of this well? And instantly, Jose Molina, who at the time was the co-executive producer of Agent Carter, said, no, absolutely not. The more messed up they are, the better our show is going to be. You know, and so you almost go with this sadistic mentality of, I need to torture my hero as much as humanly possible, because that's where the drama comes from. That's where the creativity is. Yeah, otherwise, it's boring. And I think it's not just the case for narrative television. I think that's the case for us as writers. You know, we, you know, and creative people. It's like we need that drama and that adversity to plow through something and to make something good.
And sometimes, at least for me, it's not even necessarily plowing. It's learning to be flexible and kind of agile on that stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things that stuck with me back in my 20s, back when we were at the park, is I was doing a lot of reading about just the idea of Taoism and Buddhism. And I was raised Christian, and I still consider myself at heart a believer in kind of the Christian tenets and the Ten Commandments and stuff. But at the same time, there's this wonderful Taoist mindset that talks about being like water, right? So water kind of moves forward. It will push small things out of the way. But if it encounters a big rock or a big obstacle, it simply goes around it. And it forms and it evolves. And I started to think about that and think of like streams. And something about that analogy always kind of stuck with me. So it's kind of that idea of be determined, work hard, move in a direction you want to go. But then there are points in life and points in creative process or in anything where you start to realize that there are certain fundamental things about the world around you that you can't change, or certain problems that no matter how hard you push up against may not budge.
Yeah.
And so then you're kind of forced to figure out these alternative solutions.
You know what I love about that analogy, the Taoist sort of mindset, it's the difference in the way that people think too. It's the idea that to some people the water is moving around the rock and it's being fluid and it's learning to be agile, and it's just the natural way of water. However, we have learned through geology that over time that water is actually cutting through that rock. Like,
yes. Yeah.
Like I like the idea of my particular mindset of, you think I'm just sort of going around you, but let's be clear. At the end of the day, there's going to be a big gap between this rock, or
Right,
in this
right.
rock.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Right. Over time, right, then it starts to wear the rock down. So
Yeah.
All right, we went way too deep. How did we go from Chaluthu costumes and amusement parks to film?
That's the beauty of talking to Alan Plummer. You suddenly find yourself talking Taoism
all over the place. So
Yeah.
So how would you, because I would certainly argue that you've been successful in your career, and I always joke that I'm envious of you, and I think the grass is always greener for a lot of us, and I think a lot of people listening to this will be like, man, this guy's got a great life and that's awesome, and I'm so jealous. How do you define creative success for yourself?
When the public thinks this guy has got a great life. I know
that was not the direction I was going for.
No,
no, I know.
Yeah, no, I think it goes back to that whole. I'm never 1,000% satisfied. I'm often very happy with the product that I am able to churn out, and I am always proud of the product I'm able to churn out. For me, it's just creating something I want to see personally. And, if no one else is going to do it, then I'm going to do it. And when I'm done with it, no matter what it is, no matter what medium it takes, if I'm happy with having read it or wrote it or written it rather, or if I'm happy with having watched it, then I feel successful. If I come out of it thinking I mucked that, then I'm not 100% happy, and then for all I know, that leads me to my next big success. I don't know. I don't.
Right.
I think that's the thing about creative people is artists are always tormented. Like,
That's true.
like
If
what is
life
success?
Gets too happy, you don't create anymore.
Yeah.
Yep.
What is success? Is it just contentment? Is it simply it
Right,
money? Or whatever. And like I don't.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just being able to create. I will say that for me, one of the big lessons for me has been the ability to create, but not be dependent on it for money. So like your point about the films and the 24-hour films, I mean, imagine, I think that's a very different mindset of creating something for enjoyment versus having to create something for income.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The moment it becomes a job.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all, right? Cece and I talked a lot about that, and I've talked about that with some other folks. But work is a 4-letter word, and even the most talented creatives can get burnt out and hate their art and hate their craft if they're doing it too long as work, or I would go so far as to say if that's your only creative outlet. Is kind of the professional side of it.
Yeah. It becomes formulaic. And the moment
Right.
that you've created a formula for your art, that's the moment that you need to figure out a way to do something else. And it can even be within the same art. But if you're writing soap operas for 10 years and you're like, oh, it occurs to me that we've given this character amnesia 3 times in 10 years, maybe you need to go to sitcoms. Maybe you need to, because let's be honest, if you're writing soap operas, you're also writing a sitcom.
You're writing something else.
Yeah. It's just forcing your brain to think differently.
Well, I think that was all my questions. I was going to ask you about advice, but I think you've already kind of touched on that with kind of the lesson aspect. We always usually like to wrap up and ask people if they have any big pieces of advice for their teenage selves or anything like that. So I don't know if you have anything to add there, but I certainly feel like we've touched on that.
Well, I think, yes, I think the adversity is a really big one, but I also think the idea is to, if I were to tell my teenage self to be opinionated, it would be very helpful to my teenage self. Don't be afraid of having an opinion. Don't be afraid of expressing that opinion. Because the next thing you know, you're going to be working for a company where people look to you because you know something and you've made it clear that you're an expert in that field. And, suddenly I grew up a big Transformers fan. And so when I'm producing the Transformers DVD box sets or the 30th anniversary Blu-ray that just came out for the movie, suddenly everyone looks to me and goes, "Well, what do you want this to look like?" Yeah. And it's only
can we
because
just clarify this is the animated movie.
Correct.
Not the
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Not the other basically computer animated movie.
Yes.
But yeah, I think just asserting yourself and making it clear. And like I said, I was a shy kid. I wasn't the type that would assert myself. You've got to be willing to do that. There are people, I came to Hollywood believing that I wouldn't make it because I wasn't an asshole. Because that's all you hear is that you've really got to be an asshole to make it in this industry. But I have met more people who have extraordinary careers in the entertainment industry who are the nicest people in Hollywood. And they're not necessarily your household names, because I feel like in one respect, to be a household name, you have to have a reputation, good or bad. But they are making a living doing the thing they absolutely love, and they are still the nicest people, and they're not in any way jaded. And so I think just knowing who you are and sticking to that, as cliche as that sounds, but also learning what your weaknesses are and plugging them in is a real key to success.
Which is awesome. And right, just being able, to your point, to do what you love and still maintain kind of your personality and not have that evolve into a person that you don't like or don't like becoming is pretty damn successful in and of itself, which is awesome.
Yeah, don't become someone that you would have hated growing up. And find something that you like. That's the other key. Is a lot of people are like, I want to be a writer, but they don't necessarily know what kind of writing they want to do. Or they might, when I came out to LA, it was specifically to make narrative feature films. I wanted to make movies, and I've learned that a long-time love of bonus features and of turning on the TV the week before, say, Robin Hood's Prince of Thieves came out in theaters, and Fox would have the behind the scenes of the movie coming up on Friday, hosted by Pierce Brosnan, and you're like, oh, I need to watch this. I need to see how this movie was made. And I never in a million years thought that I would be the one making those documentaries, but I loved watching them. So I think the idea is to find the thing you love, whether you're conscious of loving it or not, because the knowledge that you get from that is crucial.
And you were flexible along the way, right? Because you to your point, you went in with this idea of, I'm going to be a feature filmmaker. Because let's be honest, that's what we're told as kids, and that's what media portrays as success, right? So for me, the version of that was, you need to write the great American novel.
Right.
If somebody had told me 20 years ago I'd be doing podcasts, or that I'd have been ghostwriting books for people, or any of the other types of things that I've done, I would have said absolutely not. So yeah absolutely.
And Alan, I fully believe that you've already written the great American novel. No one ever knows that it's the great American novel until the person has gone anyway.
So once I'm dead, it will be. Yeah. I'm afraid. My wife's actually trying to convince me to go back and revisit it and write it. And I'll be honest with you, what I'm struggling with now is, we all have these projects that we write when we're younger that stay in the desk drawer.
Yeah.
Because it's not good enough to share. And I think there's a tough line there to decide, when do you resurrect something and rewrite it, or when do you just kind of move on to the next thing?
So
and
here's the thing.
I struggled with that for a while now.
It's not that it's not good enough to share. I have learned that it's not the right time to share it.
Okay.
So at some point in time, you'll be like, you know what? This is the time that this needs to come out of the drawer. And you might need to tweak it. You might need to do some revisions, but it's not that it's not good enough. If the idea won't leave your head, there's something to that idea.
Okay. My dad used to tell me when I was a kid, when I was starting to write, he used to say to me that everybody had at least one good story in them, and that a lot of people go through their lives without ever sharing that story or tapping into that. And I always thought there was a lot of truth and power to that. I would like to think that I have more than one great story in my head. I certainly have told more than one story in my life.
Yeah, well,
I definitely think that's true.
Think about all the great writers out there, and for some people, they could be like, well, they wrote the great American novel, and then they disappeared into, not into necessarily obscurity, but into like J.D. Salinger.
Yeah, I was just thinking Catcher in the Rye.
Like fled the public eye. So really, you don't want to write the great American novel and have it be the great American novel while you're alive, because otherwise now you're just going to
anything's a failure after that.
Yeah, you then have to, you've got the sophomore slump and the pressure that comes with that. And so, I like the idea that everyone's got a good story. I hate the idea that everyone could potentially only have one good story.
Yes. Well, I think where my father was coming from was kind of trying to come from a good place.
Oh,
saying,
absolutely.
Everybody's got at least one that they hang on to.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, well, listen, this has been awesome. Really, it's always fun to catch up, but this one in particular has been really enjoyable. It's always kind of a nice trip down memory lane and kind of hearing you talk about everything and just kind of trading notes on what's going on in our lives. So let's wrap up really quickly with a couple plugs for your stuff. Where do people find you if they want to learn more about the work you're doing and kind of what you're involved in?
The best place to find me really is Twitter. I am on Twitter. I am at bward028. And you can go to shoutfactory.com and you can visit the website and see all of the cool stuff that we've got coming out, and please, I encourage you to buy anything you see on that website. You could also go to our Shout Factory YouTube page, but then you can also find me in the short films that we're doing over at slushpileentertainment.com.
Is that slush or slash? Sorry.
Slush, as in, well, as a writer, the slush pile.
Yes.
So slushpileentertainment.com. And you can see the short films we've made for the 48-hour film project there. And those are some of the most fun that I've ever had. So we decided we wanted to make them available for people to see. And just stay tuned because we'll have more stuff coming out. Awesome. And like you said, I've got a podcast, so you can look for the Arkham sessions and come listen to a clinical psychologist geek out over Batman.
Over the Batman the Animated Series.
Correct.
Which is probably one of my favorite. Although I do like the ones that you did about the original Batman movie and some of the ones about those with the Michael Keaton stuff was great. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that. And we've been talking, we want to get you and Drea back later on to talk about the creative side of the podcast and pick her brain, because that's a whole different world, right? Being a clinical psychologist and moving into a phase that's uniquely creative and different, especially when you're coming at it from an academic. I think my wife in particular with her PhD in social work could certainly relate to some of what her experiences have been.
Absolutely. So, yeah. And Drea had her entire introduction to psychology happened through a creative channel, watching something on television and saying, yep, I'm suddenly very interested in these characters. And, and so, creativity can shape us in more ways than we could possibly imagine.
Right.
I'm ready to do this podcast whenever you are, by the way. I'm just, so
let's make it happen. Let's find a time for the two of them. And I also was going to ask you, so your buddy Frank, is that the infamous Frank of the Han Solo refrigerator? Is that who I'm thinking of?
No, different Frank, but that Han Solo refrigerator.
I know.
Yeah,
I remember
my friend
tweeting about that once.
My friend Frank Ippolito, who people might know from Face Off, the sci-fi channel. He does a lot of creature effects and makeup and stuff like that, and created the Han Solo and Carbonite as a refrigerator, which is great.
Well, and I knew you were friends with him too. And when you mentioned Frank, I was like, wait, is that him? I was like, okay. All right. So, very cool. All right. Well, Brian, it's always been fun. We will definitely be in touch soon. We'll schedule this other one and get both you and Dre on together, because I want to pick her brain, and we want to, I think, spend a whole episode just talking about the podcast and that side of your all's lives. Maybe we'll get into some of the Comic-Con stuff and the costume stuff then as well.
We can talk about all that if you want, but let's be honest, I really just want to hang out with you.
Thank you. Likewise. I greatly appreciate it. All right, buddy. It's been good to chat.
Thanks for the opportunity.
I will be in touch soon.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Great interview. Probably one of my favorites. I know I said that earlier, but as you can tell, he and I always have a great time talking. And again, like he said, I'll find any excuse for he and I to catch up. This was one episode in particular that I was really excited to capture and share with you guys. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I certainly did talking to him. But yeah, so take a look. Find Brian on Twitter at bward028. You can also find him at Comic-Con if you're ever attending San Diego Comic-Con, or a number of other ways. But yeah, if you're familiar with Shout Factory and the videos those guys are doing and the re-releases of old movies and TV shows, then you are no doubt familiar with Brian's work, whether you realize it or not. So thanks again, bud. I appreciate it. If you like the episode, do me a favor and write a review for us on iTunes or any other podcast directories. In fact, if you send me an email with a screenshot of your review and include your name and address, I'm more than happy to send you a few stickers as my way of saying thanks for that review. Also, remember that you can find us on the web in a number of places. One, there's our website, headheartandhustle.com. You can also find us on Twitter at headhearthustle with no E. You can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and even Google+. Lastly, I'll just mention that our logo was created by the wonderful, talented designer Meg Shearer. If you dig the logo, you can let Meg know through Twitter at Meg's Art Tweet. You can also find more of her work on Society6, so check it out if you're really liking that. And lastly, let me just give a shout out to the band and the fellows responsible for the music that you hear in the episodes of Head, Heart, and Hustle. The band Starch to Sugar, so I thank you guys for doing that. You can find more of their music on their Facebook page or search for starchtossugar.com and you'll find the band's website. So again, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and go create something.